How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to another episode of Mid-Season Evaluation. This installment is all about the London Spitfire and San Francisco Shock. As usual, I'll be giving an honest opinion and review on how both teams have performed through the first two stages of the 2019 Overwatch League season. Since London has the worst record, let's start with them. After 14 games, the London Spitfire are 4th place in the overall standings at 9-5 with a plus 12 map differential. Not bad at all, London. You're a top 4 team in the league record-wise, but things have not been as easy as their record may imply. The road for them has actually been pretty bumpy, just like what last year. Let's take a look at the path they've traveled down, starting with their offseason. While the team didn't make any major changes, there were a few moves they decided to make. Move number 1 was parting ways with their backup main support player Closer, who decided to go play for the Dallas Fuel. Since they had no players on their bench, London now needed to sign at least 2 players to meet the league minimum of an 8-man squad. They decided to fill out their roster by signing the DPS player Guard from the Overwatch Contenders Korea team Element Mystic, and the flex support player Krillin, who has only played in Trials and in Open Division up until this point. With Badoshin, Birdring, and Prophet still being really good, these new guys would have to work really hard if they ever wanted to get some significant playtime. With the Spitfire's roster being complete, they were set to start their journey of defending their titles as Kings of the Overwatch League. Their first test in Stage 1 would be on opening night against the Philadelphia Fusion, which was the team they beat to become champions last year for those of you who weren't already aware. London had to prove that their championship victory was no fluke by beating the team who so desperately wanted revenge on them. Unfortunately for the Spitfire and their fans, the Fusion had the better day as they went on to win the set 3-1. But it was okay though. The Spitfire lost 3 of their 4 matches to open up a stage last year. It really wasn't a big deal, right? They would bounce back later in the week against the Eternal for sure. Well, not quite. They actually ended up losing by the same score. London would start off their year on the wrong foot at 0-2. In week 2, London took advantage of their winnable game by defeating the Justice to finally get in the win column. Even though the Justice were not a good team, this game still somehow went the distance. Not just that, but the Spitfire were forced to clutch up and pull off a reverse sweep after losing maps 1 and 2 heading into halftime. One thing worth noting was that London decided to take Birdring off of the Zarya role and have him go on the bench. Prophet would take over on Zarya and Guard would now be playing Brig. In all honesty, this was probably the right move. I think that London had a lot of problems with their GOATS play early on, but Birdring appeared to be one of the biggest weaknesses. Not only did his Zarya feel lackluster, but his basic understanding of how to use her in GOATS was not good enough. We've also seen Prophet play well on Zarya before, and with him being good at just about anything he plays, it was hard to imagine him not doing better than Birdring. As to why Guard was playing over Birdring, well, I'm assuming that it more than likely had to do with Birdring only practicing Zarya at the time, but there could be a lot more behind it than just that. Perhaps Birdring's break was even worse than his Zarya. What I liked about Guard though was that he did more than just bring an okay break to the table. He could also swap onto Sombra if needed and be effective on her. Although the Spitfire finally got a win, I definitely had my concerns. It's not like they beat a very strong team. The Justice were widely regarded as a bottom 3 team in the league during Stage 1, and having to reverse sweep them just to win makes the situation look even worse. The good news is that they used this game as a catalyst to boost their confidence. Up next was a tougher opponent in the Spark, and once again the Spitfire prevailed, this time in more dominant fashion. They weren't done quite yet though. London extended their win streak to 3 after winning a close game against the Gladiators and spoiling Decay's league debut at the same time. At 3-2, the team appeared to be in a decent position to make stage playoffs if they could finish strong. With their ghosts looking somewhat improved and having a winnable game against the Dragons next, it seemed like that tough first week was going to be forgotten very quickly. With Shanghai still experimenting and trying to find a lineup that worked best for them, I expected the Spitfire to have the edge, and with them going up 2-1 in the series after 3 maps, the game seemed like it was all over. But then the team just couldn't seem to seal the deal. They got crushed on Route 66, then got out DPS'd on Ilios, giving them their first loss in nearly a month. But there was no need to fear, right? Sure, they ruined a perfectly good opportunity to get their 4th win and move closer to clinching a playoff berth, but they still had another chance. If they could beat the Dynasty in Week 5, then they could still squeak in. And with their good track record against Seoul, I thought they had the advantage for sure. They were 4-0 against the Dynasty in the all-time head-to-head matchups, but I guess that doesn't mean anything since Seoul ended up winning this game big. This loss officially eliminated London from playoff contention as they finished Stage 1 at 3-4. I don't know what it is about London, but they just can't seem to beat Fissure. It doesn't matter what team he plays for either. The Spitfire have an 0-4 all-time record against him. Not a good look considering the fact that you decided to trade him away during the inaugural season. After a very underwhelming and unsuccessful Stage 1, many were starting to wonder why things were going so wrong. Why was it that the Season 1 champs were struggling so much? They maintained their championship core. They still had Gesture, Fury, Prophet, Birdring, Badoshin, and Nuss. I brought this up earlier, but the main reason they were so bad was because of their dysfunctional GOATs. Early on, one of the biggest issues for the Spitfire was Birdring. I have no idea why, but he just wasn't good at GOATs. His Zarya was making the rest of the team suffer. But even after he was taken out of the equation, it really didn't matter. The other noticeable weakness that everybody was talking about was Gesture. one of the top main tanks in the world was struggling to win the Reinhardt battle more often than not. If any of you are familiar with professional sports, such as the NFL or NBA, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the Spitfire looked like they were suffering from a championship hangover. If you're unfamiliar with this term, basically it's when a team wins a championship, then the year after they fall off drastically trying to defend their title. They remind me a lot of the 2011 New York Giants. In this NFL season, the Giants went on a crazy Super Bowl run after just barely squeaking into the playoffs. Then the following year, they looked horrible and failed to even make the playoffs. Sounds a lot like the Spitfire, does it not? But anyway, even though I had high expectations for London after what they did last year, it wasn't all that surprising to see them have such an up and down stage. After all, once Stage 2 in 2018 was over, London failed to make another stage playoff appearance. The Spitfire needed to turn it around in Stage 2, or they could put themselves in a hole that's hard to overcome later on in the year. And luckily, they did just that. London went 2-0 in Week 1 after beating Florida and the Defranless Atlanta Reign. I was a little bit worried after they nearly lost to the Mayhem, but at least they dominated against Atlanta. Fury even had one of the craziest grab eats I've ever seen. The one thing that was really standing out for me in this first week for the Spitfire was Guard no longer in the starting lineup. Instead, Bird Ring would once again be put in, but this time on Brigitte instead of Zarya. And while he was nothing spectacular on Brig, I think it's safe to say that he was no longer a major weakness that could be exploited all the time. And Gesture was kind of in the same boat. His Reinhardt was looking a lot stronger. This was the Gesture I was expecting to see since day one. He was no longer some poor excuse of a Rhine player. Although London looked better, I still did have my doubts about them since they only beat two struggling teams. Their real test would be the Fusion in Week 2, and it's safe to say that they passed this test after getting a hard-fought victory where Gesture, Prophet, and Fury played out of their minds during the series-clinching win on Rialto. The Spitfire only continued to look better after this game. They were able to increase their win streak to 5 after sweeping the Uprising and Eternal in back-to-back games. This team appeared to be getting stronger and stronger. They were finally looking like the team that won a championship again. An undefeated stage was actually starting to look likely so long as they could win against the Hunters. Unfortunately for London, they ended up being one of the teams that fell victim to the unordinary Wrecking Ball DPS comps that the Hunters like to use. You would think that they would be able to handle it since DPS is what they're best at, but I guess not. One thing I almost forgot to mention that I quickly wanted to talk about before we move on was the mid-stage signing of the support player Quarterman. It was cool to see London get a little bit more depth at their support position, but I'm curious as to why they decided to sign him of all people. The last major tournament he was a part of was Apex Season 4. He also recently played in Open Division, but so far we haven't seen him play at all yet on stage, so we don't really know what he's capable of. But anyway, even after their tough loss to Chengdu, the Spitfire bounced back by crushing the Outlaws in Week 5, allowing them to finish Stage 2 at 6-1. As a result of their strong performance, London clinched a playoff berth, and were awarded the 2 seed since they won the Atlantic Division. Now they would have to face the 5-2 Spark in the first round. Would the Spitfire continue to dominate, or would they go back to their Stage 1 ways and fall apart? Well, you all know what happened. London started off good by taking Oasis, but then they seemed to crumble. The Spitfire struggled big time for the rest of this series, resulting in them being eliminated from the playoffs. They failed to even capture a single objective on Hanamura, Blizzard World, and Watchpoint Gibraltar. My question for the Spitfire is, how do you go from a dominant 6-1 team to that? I apologize in advance for what you're about to hear, London fans, but what the hell was that? How do you put up zeros on the scoreboard in 3 straight maps? What an embarrassing way to lose. If you're a fan of this team, you should feel very disappointed. I mean, I'm not even a supporter of this team and I'm furious. I just don't get it. I thought you guys were supposed to be clutch in the playoffs. What happened to that dangerous team from last year that could beat literally anybody else in the league? That version of them is long gone as far as I'm concerned. I understand there's a lot more competition in the league now, but losing in the fashion they did is unacceptable. Okay, I'm done ranting now. Just thinking about all this makes me really upset. Although the Spitfire have underperformed tremendously in my opinion, they're still 4th place in the league right now. If the overall playoffs started today, they would be in. But even so, it's hard for me to overlook this team's failures, which is the exact reason why I am giving them a B- as their midseason grade. Sure, you're 9-5 and are still one of the better teams in the league, but this team has been all over the place. It's very difficult for me to overlook their Stage 1 woes and how bad they choked in the playoffs. The Spitfire are Season 1 champions for crying out loud. It's time to start acting like it by playing the way we all know you can. This team is unbelievably scary when they're at their best. Let's see them get back to that form now. Now it's time to talk about the Shock. This is a team that's played up to their expectations. Their 11-3 record and plus 33 map differential is good enough for 3rd place in the league. As you can see by this record, the Shock have played extremely well through 14 games. But why exactly have the Shock been so dominant? Let's find out by taking a look at their past, starting with their offseason. After an ugly Season 1 where the team admitted they were building for the future, San Francisco made a few moves to bolster their roster. They added extra depth on main tank by acquiring Smurf from the Outlaws. They also added a flex support player in Violet who many were considering to be a superstar level player, and then there's DPS. Although they traded away their Sombra ace Dante to Houston, they made up for it by signing Rascal and trading for the superstar Tracer player Striker from the Boston Uprising. This new team was looking mighty dangerous. They were absolutely loaded at every single position. Because they were looking so dangerous, many experts had high expectations for them. I also believed they would be good, but I didn't think they would be as good as others seemed to think. I thought they would be playoff contenders for sure, but them being better than someone like the NYXL was something I found hard to believe. Before I could fully jump on the bandwagon, I needed to see some proof that they were top tier. The Shock had 2 big games coming up in their first week, and I was excited to see what this hyped up roster was capable of. And they actually looked strong in their opening game against the Dallas Fuel, but they also lost to the Gladiators in the same week. Sure, they appeared to be inconsistent in their first week of play, but it was clear that the Shock were experimenting. Super and Smurf were splitting playtime while the team tried to figure out which tank they should roll with full time. Super tended to play on the escort and hybrid maps, while Smurf came in on the assault and control ones. The Shock also weren't quite sure about a few of their other mainstay starters. Nevix would come in over Choyobin on certain maps, and even Sinatra wasn't in all the time, even though his Zarya is insane. Violet wasn't being utilized all that much either. This trend of an inconsistent lineup would continue during their Week 2 showdown against the Vancouver Titans, and although they would lose 3-1, the game felt a lot closer than that. Surely the Shock were feeling confident even though they were only 1-2 at the time. And while their win against the Spark was kind of ugly in Week 3, the Shock made a change by running Rascal on Brigitte full-time over Architect. After a solid win over the Justice later in the week, the Shock were set to have a showdown against the undefeated at the time NYXL. While they came up short against a top team in the league yet again, it felt very close even though the score would tell you otherwise. One noticeable thing about this game in terms of the Shock's lineup was that they were finally running the 6 players who put them in the best possible position to win. The lineup of Super, Choyobin, Sinatra, Rascal, Violet, and Moth would be the one you saw from here on out. You could tell how much potential this lineup had after convincingly beating the Eternal and finishing their stage at 4-3. Because of their decent map differential, the Shock were officially playoff bound for the first time in franchise history. The team certainly made sure to make the most of it too. They started by crushing the Defiant 3-0 in what was one of the biggest blowouts of the entire playoffs. Then they dominated the Fusion in the semifinals 4-0 to advance to the Stage 1 Grand Finals where they would have a rematch of epic proportions with the Vancouver Titans. The Shock were red hot, and they were playing some of the best Overwatch I've ever seen from them. But how would they fare against the top dogs in the league? Well, pretty good actually. They took Vancouver the distance in a super intense, back and forth, 7-map thriller. Unfortunately for the Shock, they would end up falling just short on their Rialto defense as the Titans would go on to win Stage 1. If you go back and watch this game, the look on the Shock's faces really does say it all. They were on the brink of defeating the #1 team in the entire league. They went up 3-2 in the series at one point as well. To come so close then lose in the end had to hurt. But San Francisco refused to let this win get them down. Before we talk about how the Shock did in Stage 2, there were a few moves they decided to make during this stage. Move number 1 was trading Babybay to the Atlanta Reign. This move made a lot of sense, because for one, the Shock had no reason to even have Babybay on their roster anymore since they already had a lot of good hit skin specialists that were better than him, but also the Reign were willing to pay good money for him. The team also decided to trade Sleepy to the Justice halfway through Stage 2, and kind of like with Babybay, Sleepy wasn't being utilized at all, so trading him away for some cash made a lot of sense. I'm happy to see both Sleepy and Babybay get another opportunity to be a starting player in the Overwatch League. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's talk more about the Shock, because they came back with a vengeance after their 1-week break between Stages 1 and 2. They picked up exactly where they left off during the playoffs by absolutely destroying all of the competition. In Week 1, they 4-0'd the Valiant and the Charge in what appeared to be extremely easy games. After doing the same to the Charge just 1 week later, they then showed that their wins against the Defiant and Spark during Stage 1 were nothing close to flukes by sweeping both of them as well. At this point, San Francisco was 5-0, and they had yet to drop a single map. With how they were playing at this point, they were without a doubt a top 2 team in the league. Not only that, but a golden stage became a realistic milestone for them to achieve, and that is exactly what they did. The Fusion and Dragons stood no chance just like everybody else. Although I will admit that the Dragons put up a really good fight. The game was much closer than the score implies. But even so, the Shock did it. They had the perfect 7-0 stage with 0 map losses. This has never been done in the history of the Overwatch League, so congrats to the Shock on that. They also won the Pacific Division over the Titans because of their stronger map differential, allowing them to clinch the #1 seed in the playoffs. And while the map streak would come to an end when they took on the Dragons in the quarterfinals, they still won the series convincingly, then absolutely destroyed the Spark after they just came off of a big victory over the London Spitfire. Now the Shock would take part in the ultimate run back against the Titans. It was time for Clash of the Gods Part 3. Would the Titans prevail once again, Or would the Shock prove that there was a new top dog in the league? Well, it turns out that the Shock forgot all about their losses in Stage 1 as they went on to defeat the Titans 4-2 and win the Stage 2 championship. It was clear after the first few maps that the Shock wanted this more. They were extra motivated to not lose to Vancouver again. I feel like this win felt even better after the Shock won that team fight on Blizzard World where they were at a tremendous disadvantage in terms of ultimate economy and yet still won it anyway. Congrats to the Shock. Their run was tremendous, and seeing them win the stage title was very fitting. The Shock had their ups and downs in Stage 1, but they were dominant when it mattered most in the playoffs, and they carried this momentum into Stage 2 by destroying the competition. Because of their crazy success through 2 stages, I've decided to give the Shock an A+ as their mid-season grade. Yes, they had early struggles, but being in 2 straight grand finals is an achievement that puts them over the top for me. The way they played in Stage 2 only makes me want to give them a high grade even more. Their dominance has led a majority of fans to believe they are either the first or second best team. They, along with the Titans, are often considered as the only S-tier teams in the Overwatch League that no one else can even touch. One thing in particular that also stands out for me when it comes to the Shock is how they have a top player at every single position. Super is arguably the best Reinhardt, Sinatra Zarya has without a doubt been the most deadly with his league best 13k damage per 10 minutes, Violet always frags on Zenyatta, Toyobin has been a top 3 diva, Rascal has been a really strong Brigand Baptiste, and Moth is a disgusting Lucio. If all of your starters are playing this well, then your dominance must be felt consistently every single game, and that is exactly what the Shock have done. The team has also played slightly above my expectations, so I feel like an A+ is well deserved. And I think that's pretty much everything I have to say about the Shock, so with that being said, that is going to wrap up this episode of Mid-Season Evaluation. What did you guys think of my review for each of these teams? Make sure to let me know down in the comment section, and feel free to give your own grades while you're at it. If you enjoyed today's content, then be sure to like and subscribe. As always, thank you all so much for watching today's video, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.